Hello, everybody. My name is Adrian Marshall. I'm the facilitator of the Grassy Plains Network. For those of you who do not know me, or this is your first Grassy Talk, Grassy Plains Network's been around since 2018 or so, but these days we are part of the Victorian National Parks Association, which is, I suppose, the main Victoria-focused nature conservation organisation in Victoria. Been around for 70 plus years. I'd like to acknowledge the country I'm on. So that's the Wurundjeri country, but as usual, pay my respects not only to elders past and present from this land, but also from all over Victoria, all over Australia, I suppose, today, since we're taking a slightly more national perspective, and considering it is NAIDOC week as well, so 50 years of Deadly, which is fantastic, and it's great to see that the NAIDOC celebrations have become far more than what they originally were, and I'd encourage you all to go do something NAIDOC related by the end of the week. So five and a half more days to go. As usual, to I suppose apologise for the terrible way that we have collectively managed to inflict a lot of rack and ruin on our grassland country, and hope that we can walk together to make it a lot better in future years. We're very lucky tonight to have Vaughn Cox with us. Vaughan retired from DQ last year after 35 years in Western Australia and the Commonwealth, as he was just describing. He's been involved in the whole range of activities like EISs, Environmental Impact Assessment, which are the equivalent of Victoria's Environmental Effect Statements. These strategic assessments, which are, the bane of Melbourne's life, at least, policy, program, compliance, and since retiring, he's kept up a keen interest in the offset side of things, and has been a great help to the Grassy Plains Network in the last year, just giving us good commentary around the complexities of the offsetting system. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Vaughan and to let him take us away. I'm sure, feel free to interrupt him and ask a question, but otherwise just throw your questions in the chat and we'll have a good crack at them as usual towards the end. Okay, thank you. Vaughan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm just now going to get this rolling. Oh, got the wrong one again. Sorry.
No, that was right. Oh, that's right.
There we go. Okay. Thank you for that generous introduction, Adrian. I look forward to doing more work with you. And the Grassy Plains Network. I just try to sort out something here on the screen. Okay, so look, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to your people about EPBC Act offsets, Adrian. I want to qualify this presentation by saying that I'm not a fan of offsets. We just seem to be stuck with them. I believe offsets were intended back in the 90s to de-incentivize significant impacts and to offset impacts that had compelling social and economic benefits, but have since been a crutch for decision makers and just the cost of doing business. Reforms to the EPBC Act in November last year mean the 2012 offsets policy is likely to be replaced this year with national environmental standards for offsets. An exposure draft of the standards, in effect regulations subject to disallowance, was released in May with comments closed in June. So I figure it's timely to review the old policy and the exposure draft standard, identify any obvious policy gaps, and review a recent offset decision for future risks. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, good. Right. So the EPBC Act applies to a range of matters of national environmental significance, including listed threatened species and ecological communities, Ramsar wetlands, such as Gippsland Lakes and Corner Inlet, and world and national heritage places. I'm only discussing here offsets for impacts to listed threatened species and threatened ecological communities. I've listed on this slide some of the more frequently impacted species and TECs in Victoria and their listing classification, whether critically endangered, endangered or vulnerable. The listing status has relevance in coming slides. Now, apologies if there's too much text on this slide. The outgoing policy has 10 principles, 8 for what comprises a suitable offset, and 2 for government decision making. I have highlighted the key text, such as being built around direct offsets, accounting for risk, being additional to existing obligations, enforceable, etc. And I'm hoping that everyone is just quickly reading through at least the highlighted text. So I won't read it all out. Principles 9 and 10 are for the decision maker to be satisfied uncertainty is addressed through the precautionary principle and that decision making is consistent and transparent. So I'll move on. Everyone's happy? In my view, principle 1 is an objective, not a principle. It's an objective, and that the principles are implemented to achieve that objective. So once the decision maker is satisfied, risks are identified and managed, outcomes are additional, the offset is timely, feasible, transparent, measurable, enforceable, etc. The direct offset is then calculated with using inputs to the offset calculator. The calculator, which we'll cover in future slides, accounts for the conservation status of species and threatened ecological communities and the quantum of impact. And using the calculator enables consistent and transparent decision making when the user impacts are explained and justified. Principles 7 and 9 call for scientific robustness. Robustness in science means that a scientific result or conclusion persists reliably even when circumstances change or different approaches are applied. It emphasizes that findings are not tied to a single experiment data set or narrowly defined conditions, but instead a general truth about the system being studied. Now, this quality ensures that scientific knowledge is dependable and not merely an artifact of a particular method or assumption. We should demand robust science in offset decision making because the outcomes are irreversible and the decision is made once only. We only get one bite at the offset cherry, so it must be scientifically robust. It must meet the requirements of the policy. You may have seen the offsets calculator previously. I mean, it's formally referred to as the offset assessment guide. For what we're covering today, it has 2 components, the impact calculator, which is on the left, and the direct offset calculator, which is the right. There is a how to use the guide that's published on the department's website. And if you're interested in offsets, then I suggest you give it a read at least once. It's quite a heavy document, but it's substantive and it's very insightful. It's a good read. The guide accompanying the calculator states that the policy and the calculator together provide a decision support framework to normalize judgments associated with determining proposed offsets. The calculator brings transparency to decision making when the inputs are justified, having regard for the policy's principles. The calculator was prepared with the intention of being used by expert users in the department, not necessarily by consultants, but the original intention was it would be used by department officials to evaluate the adequacy of a proposal coming forward from industry. But it tends to have been captured by and is being gamed by industry. So we'll return to the calculator. Are there any questions? I'm happy to take any.
There are questions in the chat, Vaughan. If you want to, there's one about whether Fed principles include avoid and minimize approach prior to offset.
Yeah, that's not included in the offsets policy as such. I mean, it's a policy for dealing with offsets. It's not a policy for dealing with the impact mitigation hierarchy. It is covered elsewhere.
Okay, but are there actual calculators about the avoid and minimise? Because, I mean, sorry, I'm not landing this on you, Vaughan. I'm pointing this one predominantly at the Victorian government, who handles offsets like shit. But the main thing is that there seems to be very little guidance on, okay, you can do offsets, but where do you draw the line on the avoid and the minimise before you even get onto the offset? Now, I know that's not the topic of this talk, but can I just drop that one in as a discussion point?
Yep. I'm not aware of one. I'm not aware of any guidance which says, okay, that's an acceptable minimum amount of impact that's avoided or minimized. You know, I'm not aware of any lines in the sand that which says, okay, we're satisfied that you have exhausted the opportunities available to you, reasonably available to you, to mitigate and minimize impacts.
Okay, well, I think that's one of the biggest flaws in the whole approach at both the federal and the state level. But as I say, this isn't a criticism of you. It's just a comment.
Thank you. We'll press on.
Please.
Okay, so that's the existing policy principles and the calculator. So let's consider the offset standards that were released for final comment this year. Those offset standards have 8 principles. First 4 being feasibility, security, direct and tangible, and to realize measurable improvements. Now, I have extracted from the exposure draft standards some key text for the first four principles, and I've highlighted some text that I find troublesome. You know, it's feasible. The offsets are feasible if they will achieve the intended outcome in a reasonable blah blah timeframe. Well, I don't know how reasonable is going to be interpreted. It's unclear how net gain will be interpreted for the purpose of the security standard. And there's some internal conflict here in providing a benefit to the affected protected matter that is quantifiable or qualitative. I'm not sure how qualitative is going to work when we are talking about a tangible offset. But maybe that's just my problem. Now to principles 5 to 8. So principles 5 to 8 are possibly less troublesome, but of course more complex and qualified than these extracts indicate. Yeah. Additionality, like for like, timely, and proximity are not new concepts for EPBC offsets. There is a commitment to update the offsets calculator, and the updated calculator in any form is yet to surface. And the offset standards will inform the contributions calculator. Now, you may have heard of the Restoration Contributions Fund, which some have likened to a pay-to-clear program. That's probably not an unreasonable comparison, and that has attracted some controversy from most quarters. I'm not going to talk about that proposal. Then the next slide is a short complete principle just to give people a feel for the structure and operation of a standard. It's the shortest one. The others go out to perhaps 10 clauses. So this is the entire draft measurable improvement standard. So you can see how a typical standard is structured and might function. If current practice is any guide, this standard could mean the offset will deliver a measurable improvement if the proponent and the consultant predictions of quality decline without offset are taken on face value by a decision maker. And look, and I'll show you the possibility of this in the case study. I'm aware of multiple critical submissions on the draft standards. I didn't personally make a submission because the submissions don't appear to be being published for transparency. I am reluctant to make submissions on proposals where my submission is not published and there's no obvious published attempt to address the issues that I raise. So just as a matter of principle, I stay away from those. Based on my experience with rubbery policy, I regard the standards as no more than spiritual guidance. And I'm not sure that spiritual guidance is going to ensure a consistent high level of practice across all the states and territories. And that these are not standards that civil society will be able to hold decision makers to account for in the courts. So again, spiritual guidance, good luck. Now, what is missing from the new and the old? Well, firstly, the standards are silent on the species or ecological community's conservation status, which is principle 3 of the current policy. They don't speak directly to the size and scale of the impacts, which is the current principle 4. There is no expectation to account for uncertainty and to manage risk, principle 5, or that the precautionary principle be applied to account for scientific uncertainty. Robust science, uncertainty, risk, and precautionary decision-making seem to be wrapped up in the ambiguous construct of high level of confidence. For every standard, there's a requirement that it be met with a high level of confidence, but we don't know what that means practically. However, the missing principles, which I've touched on here, may be retained in the updated calculator if it is based on the one currently in use. So we must wait for the final standards, the calculator, and possibly early decisions to see whether if you like, the next generation of decision making is evidence-based and precautionary. Scientific uncertainty and failing to characterize it, risk rate it, and managing it is a huge risk to offset failure and the listed species or TEC. I'm more confident a housing estate will clear an ecological community than I am an offset proposal will restore the impact of TEC to no net loss or net gain. In my view, confidence on both sides of the ledger is not like for like. So let's look at a offset proposal that was approved in April this year. Some of you may be aware of it. It was action was referred in February 25, and it has the EPBC reference number 2025-10-100. It's a residential development in Dramana with a significant residual impact to the listed endangered swamp skink. We'll consider the offset calculator and how the final direct offset obligation is sensitive to certain user inputs, particularly sensitive to certain user inputs. I have selected this recent example because it illustrates systematic problems with policy implementation. Only using one case study, Adrian, because I think that is enough for the purpose of this exercise. So that's the impact site. 170 Boundary Road and 62 Collins Road, Dramana, Victoria. I'm sure there's many of you there that are not unfamiliar with that neck of the woods. The red shaded is impact that'll be cleared. Habitat that'll be cleared. and the green retained habitat. And when I looked at this figure, I wondered what's the fate of the swamp skink that will be retained, and the habitat that will be retained. Do they really have a future? In any case, we go to the offset. Okay, so the area shaded red is an offset property at Locksport, Gippsland, located between Lake Reeve and Bass Strait. I've circled the general area of the Dramana offset. It is in here, okay? And thanks to David Nicastro, I think David Nicastro from Gippsland Lakes, Friends of Gippsland Lakes is with us. David provided me with this image, which shows sea level rise in 2040 and 2100. And if we just flick back and can look at this area here, looks like it's going to be quite significantly impacted by sea level rise by 2040. And by 2100 could be gone. I will press on. Anyway, so thinking of this area as the circle that I marked in the earlier slide, there's actually 4 EPBC Act approvals that are drawing offsets from this property. Now, I call this an offset farm. You've got a few offset farms in Victoria. So, 4 approvals. The first approval, for which there was an offset, is this Healesville to Cooirup Road upgrade, and that has these 2 offsets areas, this portion and this portion. There are two separate offset sites. Long story, won't go into it, but that's for southern brown bandicoot impacts. The second offset that was approved was for Gippsland Line upgrade, Pakenham to Langwarry East. Again, southern brown bandicoot offset. This is 8563. I think it's a little 5 hectare block. The next was for residential development at Cyril Beachy Lane, Cranbourne. Again, southern brown bandicoot offset. Here, there's a little bit here and here. And then, of course, just this year, April 26, we're using this for the swamp skink offset for Dramana. It's a bit disconcerting that there's still so much of an offset property left. I'm sure that the landowner intends to, as best as possible, extract more offsets out of the site. And I imagine that consultants acting on behalf of industry have an eye on this for any future projects that will have significant residual impacts to swamp skink and southern brown bandicoot. So we'll look out for them. Now, I want to have a look at the offsets calculator. I'm going to stop sharing this. Stop sharing this, and I'm going to bring up the calculator. Can you see the calculator, Adrian?
No, I can see your screen with your notes on it,
Right.
your PowerPoint notes.
Okay, I am going to therefore share the screen.
Mind you, the notes were very good.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you. I'll come back to them. And maybe I should just put them up for people to read.
We can see the offset calculator now. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So the offset calculator, this is the calculation that delivered the 100% offset. This is the goal, 100% offset from 28.6 hectares at the Locksport site for impacts to 17.09 hectares at Dramana. So let's start at the beginning. The first thing that one does is, after typing in the name of the impacted protected matter, is select the EPBC Act status: vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. In this case, it's endangered, so it has an annual probability of extinction of 1.2%. But if you selected critically endangered, it would be 6.8. I'll come back to the significance of that later. But for now, let's just keep it as it should be, at endangered.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask, is that the prediction of extinction at that site alone?
It is based on the predicted annual probability of extinction based on the category,
Okay.
whether it's
across its entire range, not just at that site.
Yeah, just across its entire range. There's not.
Whoa.
It's not based on any particular location or land parcel. It is just in general. Okay. There is, of course, opportunity while we're here and we have time. There is opportunity here to select other, and for someone to say, well, I think we've done some further studies and we think that it's no longer critically endangered. We think it is on the verge of, and we can give it 10% annual probability of extinction, and that escalates the calculation even more. But I should not do that.
There is the point that some species haven't actually been assessed under EPBC criteria, therefore the data is not available.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And interestingly, some protected matters were listed back in the early 2000s. Like, I'm thinking of my local, Boxholm grassy woodlands, listed critically endangered 20 years ago. Well, at the hands of the EPBC Act, they are probably even more endangered now than they were then. There'd be less of them, and the annual probability will probably increased as a result of 20 years of government decision making. What's happened in the meantime? At the risk of being a little too sarcastic. So let's go back to the offset calculation. Now, if I'm a consultant, I'm going to pretend to be a consultant, and my job is to act in the best interests of my client. I'm not here to save the world. I'm running a business. It's for the regulator. It's for the regulator to evaluate and test and make a decision. It's for me to act on behalf of my client. Is this large enough text to see? Can people read this? It's okay?
It's pretty small.
Okay, I'll up it.
You can increase, you can increase it by the wheel on your mouse.
Yeah, oh yeah, I know I'm cool with that. I just wanted to be sure that I've got it, the font size large enough for people to see. So there's two sides to the calculator. There's the impact calculator side to the left, offset calculator right side to the right. I'm sure that Biosis may best endeavour to not overestimate the area of the impact. And I'm sure that they didn't overestimate the average quality of that impacted area. Okay. Now, you can select quality on a scale of 0 to 10. If I was to select 10, then the total quantum of impact that has to be offset is basically the area times 1. Times 5 is half. So it is a linear scale from 0 to 10, which means that there needs to be some, linear gradation of the quality between 2 and 3 and 3 and 4, and arguably it's not dissimilar in terms of the sort of the net increase from 4 to 5 to 5 to 6 and so on. We will go back to 4. So very important to get quality scoring right. That's something that I can probably talk about a little later. But this was where they landed, 17 hectares at 4 out of 10 quality. Now we go to the offset calculator side. The 6.84 adjusted hectares comes across. There's 2, and that's what we have to offset. There's 2 elements to the offset calculation. One is to do with risk of loss, and the other is quality. Risk of loss is about the likelihood of the total loss of the values of the protected matter at the site. So it's equivalent to clearing. It's would be equivalent perhaps to excessive fertilizer application on a native grassland that causes it to go. You know, it's eutrophies the soil, and it's overtaken by weeds, and it no longer meets the diagnostic criteria for that grassland. It'll also be the same if you were repeatedly clearing brigalow in the brigalow belt in Queensland, and eventually you got there and you cleared it so many times that it did not regrow, so it's gone. But since the nature positive plan put out in 22 by Minister Plibersek, the department has been using 0% risk of loss. So 0% risk of loss is now just business as usual. So there's not much purpose in discussing that any further. Where the, if you like, the gaming's maybe too strong a term, but where the challenge lies is with selecting appropriate values for habitat quality. So it's this row here that matters now. So the department obviously accepted that the start quality of the offset site was 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 using the same scoring method as used for the impact site. And that in 10 years, under business as usual, the impact site would decline from 7 out of 10 to 5 out of 10. Business as usual. But managed as an offset, it would not decline. It would increase over 10 years from 7 to 8 out of 10. So what's material here is the raw gain. The raw gain is 3, because it's the difference between what it would be without offset and what it will be with offset. So keeping an eye on this 100%. So if for example, it wasn't going to decline from 7 to 5, it would decline from 7 to 6. We'd only have 67% of the direct offset. And we'd need to significantly bump that up. We'd need a larger offset area. I'll go back to, okay. Oh, and if you accidentally keep it at the same quality, well then you need 3 times as much offset area. Sorry, that was my mistake. I am still pretending to be a consultant. But what the department accepted is that there's 90% confidence that we're going to experience a raw gain that's comprised of 2 parts decline, 1 part improvement. And I couldn't for the life of me see how you could have such a high level of certainty around speculated outcomes over a 10-year time frame. So when I made comments on the draft offset proposal, my response was, well, I don't accept 5. I think there is probably potential for some decline, but I'm uncertain. I can accept that there's probably scope for improvement because if you are setting measurable performance standards for improvement and you have to comply with that, well then it's possible that you can get from 7 to 8, but I'm not sure the confidence levels. So I probably said something like, well, I think you've probably only got a the 50% likelihood of declining from 7 to 6. So that's as likely as not. It's as likely as not that it might decline. It might decline from 7 to 6 as just stay at 7. So I thought, well, 50% likelihood, 7 to 6. And I wouldn't have given them 90% confidence in getting from 7 to 8. And I thought, well, perhaps it's 80%. This is just me throwing some numbers around for the sake of the exercise, looking at the sensitivity of the calculator. So if you have 50% confidence, which is just sitting on the fence for decline over 10 years, and you have a little more confidence than that in there being an improvement, so let's say 50%, and let's say 80%, well, then let's just cut it down the middle and say 65%, because it's a weighted average of the confidence you have in decline and the confidence you have in improvement. You with me? I need you to nod, Adrian, so that you're with me. I can see you. Yeah. Okay. Well, I might have said something like, this is for the sake of making the point that I thought that their offsets were inadequate. So my assessment was, well, yes, I don't know about decline, maybe, and I'll give you a less optimistic increase. For 2 raw gain, you've got an average of 65% confidence. Well, bingo, you need to find another 28 hectares. I criticised the offset proposal on a number of other fronts, okay, but this was just playing with numbers to make the point to the proponent and to the department that I thought that the offset was severely inadequate, probably not even suitable. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how you can play with some numbers and get quite different results based on the quality of the information that's available, because all that I was doing was working on the information provided in the preliminary documentation and in the offset management plan. I'm curious too that in Victoria seems to be the only state that habitually uses 10 years as the time time until ecological benefit, which always seems very pessimistic when they're considering quality decline without offset, and always seems very optimistic when considering timeframes for achieving improvements, particularly for grassland communities. Restoring grassland communities is atrociously difficult, and for anyone to be able to detect a signal above all the noise in these ecosystems and in the climate variability over a period, it astounds me that anyone thinks that they're going to get a statistically sort of reliable signal at 10 years, given the intractable nature of managing some grassland communities. This is something that would be good to follow up, Adrian, with the powers that be, is where on earth did you get 10 years from, and why you're always sticking to it? Because in Queensland, it's generally 20 years. In Western Australia, it's 15 to 20 years. And similarly elsewhere. There doesn't seem to be any justification for 10 years on every occasion.
I think it's built into the native veg regulations, but some other people who are more knowledgeable about this can probably give a better answer. But it's you have to do your offsets, get the money for 10 years or whatever, and you do it for 10 years, and then even though it's supposed to be in perpetuity, you have to spend the money you'll get given in that 10-year time frame. It's just in the native veg regulations, I think, but I'm not 100% sure.
But your sense is that somehow it is hot-wired into Victorian offset arrangements. Okay. Well, that doesn't mean it has to be hot-wired into EPBC decision-making. particularly when it represents risk, particularly when it drives risk when calculating offsets. Because the consultants pop 10 years in, and then they make best endeavor to try to minimize their offset obligations by putting dodgy numbers into condition decline and condition improvement.
Well, no one's going to go back and check the results anyway, are they? They're not going to go back and say, oh, in 10 years it turned into an 8. Or...
Not ever.
Yeah.
No, these things are mostly set and forget. I'll go back to...
There is an online... Can I just say there's online now, you do have to actually put in reports, and they do actually read them now, and they do actually check on them. And there was recently, I thought, a grassland audit of all the offsets.
Yeah, but who's checking them, for God's sake? There's no one left to check them.
At least the feds actually were looking back, and they were checking that things were done.
Not in Victoria.
Something happened. No.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just putting this back to where it was. Okay, so I've reset those numbers to have a 100% direct offset, but what I want to do now is change the status. Let's see what happens if we make that critically endangered. And it's only 58% now. So
what?
If you have a critically endangered ecological community or species, it pays to have a smaller, shorter time until ecological benefit, and to have a larger raw gain. It escalates. There's not a lot of difference between vulnerable. There's certainly not as much difference between vulnerable and endangered outcomes doing this than there is the significant difference that you see between endangered and critically endangered. I'm sure that is something that consultants have a pecuniary, and their clients have a pecuniary interest in testing this calculator to its maximum to know where the greatest sensitivities are, so that small tweaks fly under the regulator's radar and give the maximum offset calculation. So in terms of habitat quality, now habitat quality, as I've shown you, is scored out of 10, which you could reasonably interpret as 0 being absent through to, say, benchmark being 10. The offset guide requires 3 site characteristics be considered when scoring habitat quality: site condition, site context, and species stocking rate. Now, the habitat quality scoring method used by Biosis here allocates that 10 to 4 to site condition, 4 to site context, and 2 to species stocking rate. That's how it divvies up the numbers, but there is nothing in the offset, in the guide to the offset calculator, that says that's how you do so. All the offsets guide says is you must have regard for these characteristics in considering and determining habitat quality. It doesn't apportion it 442 or 334, you see in some instances. Look, I just don't trust the calculator inputs because the consultant prepared the scoring method, not the department. In my view, the regulator should be preparing these these scoring methods independently, consulting with subject matter experts, developing a scoring method up which meets the policy requirements, and then tests the application of that scoring method with end users. But I don't believe it's the place of consultants to be developing habitat scoring methods which will then be used by them on behalf of their clients to meet their clients' expectations of a quick approval that's cost effective and has low compliance risk.
Oh,
Debbie.
sorry, Vaughan. Deb Reynolds has got her hand up.
Can I just say that in the end, doesn't the Commonwealth Minister will make the final determination regardless of it?
It does.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm looking at that right now. So and what sort of, they have no qualifications at all mostly. So how come they get the overriding decision making?
The minister or the minister's delegate makes
Yeah.
decisions based on advice from the department.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm not aware of any evidence of independent expert input and agreement to the methodology or the metrics used. It's, as far as I can tell, and it's similar with other habitat quality scoring methods used in Victoria, is that they are developed by consultants. Okay, it's agreed to by the department, but in a sense, the department is being reactive. The department hasn't prepared proactively these scoring methods, developed them with subject matter experts, tested them, consulted on them. Like, you would think it's reasonable to consult with NPA, subject matter experts and stakeholders and end users, because this is critical. How you measure 4 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 5 out of 10 is all relevant to the evidence that you then need to be able to have confidence in the decision you're making around the selection of that of that score, and any metrics that you use to be able to detect that score, attainment of that score, or assessing the veracity of their claims around likely condition decline without offset. Because unless you know with some reliability what the start quality is and what the future quality is without offset, then how do you know that what's happening on the site, business as usual, is going to lead to that decline? It's all smoke and mirrors. It's very rubbery. So I would just say discard or disregard those metrics altogether and start again, because it's fundamentally conflicted.
I'm afraid you're right. I mean, anything we've seen over the past few years we've noted so many dodgy brothers consultants that you just can't believe them. And look, the whole system is completely skewed to a formulaic, non-ecological consideration, exactly as you say. And look, I would actually just like to point out that I think this is one of the best talks that we've had so far, because it has been so stimulating. I mean, my stress level has gone up again, because I normally try not to think about offsets. But this has been absolutely brilliant. And the analysis is critically important, because we are riding on a shit system. We totally are. And we are accepting the loss under the banner of offsets. And it's, as you say, it's smoke and mirrors with this calculator, based on rocky consultants, because the feds have got some pretty good ecologists, but not enough. The feds, Victoria doesn't have any more because they've sacked us all. So yeah, we're looking at a very, very rough system. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for exposing all this. It's been really interesting.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that, Vanessa. Well, I'll press on. So, can I say that the inputs selected to the calculator are not backed by robust science. They're just a consulting firm's conflicted assertions and speculation. Okay, I'm just confirming what you're saying, Vanessa. Like, the 90% confidence here, the 90% confidence that was accepted for the 3 raw gain and how that 3 raw gain was comprised, is explained only by what I call a string of far less certain assertions, which were repeated and self-reinforced to make compelling reading for a naive assessment officer and a delegate. Okay, so some of the things that they said were Without offset management, the impacts from deer are likely to have a significant impact to the habitat condition of the site in the short and long term. Without installation and maintenance of fences and signage, impacts from unauthorized access would likely increase over time. Impacts at the current rate would lead to significant long-term damage and loss of habitat. So these are the justifications. Without active weed control, the site is likely to see an increase in weed coverage and diversity within the next 10 years. Over the proposed 10-year time, the compounding impacts from habitat destruction and pest predators are likely to measurably reduce the extent and density of the local swamp skink population and may eventually lead to local extirpation. So this is typical of offset proposals I've read, is that the narrative, which is, it's not based in any evidence, there's no science, it's a narrative that's designed to paint a bleak picture for someone who cannot evaluate, for someone who doesn't have good BS detectors. Okay.
I've just noticed John Del Pratt has his hand up. We're going to just keep interrupting you for the next hour. It's going to be great. It's we're enjoying doing that. John.
Vaughn, I'm not familiar with the calculator. I don't claim familiarity there, but is it the calculator is ineffective, or is it in the wrong hands? I'm not clear on your point there. Is it just in the wrong hand? I mean, would it work if it had appropriate information input, or is the calculator itself unbalanced? And the reason I ask the question is because I can see this, if it became a matter for for the department to be completing, or an agent of the department to be completing it, it would then lead to a stream of consultancies let by the government rather than paid for by the developer. I'm not arguing the case. I'm just asking the question.
Look, I'm reasonably satisfied with the existing policy and the calculator. I just think that it's been poorly implemented. This is being recorded, isn't it? I think that I think the jury is in that the offsets policy that there have been implementation problems. Even Graham Samuel said that he said that there are design and implementation problems with the offsets policy. He didn't go into any detail, but he didn't go into any detail because the secretariat that was writing all his words was populated with departmental officers. So it's unlikely that there was going to be anything particularly critical of the department in any detail in his report. Given that the draft words would have gone through consecutive pairs of safe hands before he got to sign anything. That's my speculation. So yeah, I think that it's non-contentious to say that the policy hasn't been well implemented. It hasn't been well implemented because the department hasn't acted as a regulator and independently prepared those habitat quality scoring methods. It hasn't developed evidentiary standards for confidence and result. What are the standards of evidence required for 90% confidence in something, or 75%, or so on?
In whose hands should those competencies be? I mean, if they don't exist, then I'm not too sure which. I just don't quite understand the point.
I think the competency has to be with the department. I think that there needs to be a critical mass of well-trained, well-supported officers that have the tools, the guidance, the materials to ensure that they're making consistent decisions that are to a standard. Now, I need to go back and say is that I'm not a great fan of offsets. Okay, and I suspect that there are some habitat qualities where we should say that should not be impacted. So it might be, and I'm just plucking a number out of the air, it could be that if you hit 7 out of 10, then you shouldn't be impacting that site. 7 out of 10 impact site should not be developed. So in preparing a habitat quality framework, you should also be identifying where where impacts are unacceptable and where offsets are probably not feasible. Offsets are not feasible because the improvements that are required to get to that quality are not ecologically feasible, are just nonsense. So I think that there are broader considerations to decision making around EPBC matters than just offsets when preparing a scoring method, if that makes sense. Okay.
So Vaughan, don't get to press on yet. Vaughn has a question as well.
I was just going to say that, you know, like Victoria runs their habitat hectare system.
Yep.
Where you do your calculations of the habitat to get the score.
Yep.
And there's a very fine line between decisions between the levels of the scores.
Yep.
You know, it's, you know, 1 point will push you in up or down.
Yeah.
Or it's very easy to manipulate the you know, the way you score the process. And I mean, usually when I scored it, I used my personal instinct and said, oh no, this is this value, I think it's worth better than that, or no, this is crappier than what the score's saying. But it's just the way it's done in Victoria, it's very easy to manipulate your result.
Yeah, I'm not unfamiliar with the VQA process 2004, which well preceded the 2012 offsets policy and was probably prepared for a different purpose. But yes, well then, if it's a fine line, I mean, it's a fine line of judgment between above or below the line, how you score. Well, then that uncertainty should be accounted for by erring on the side of caution in terms of what the impact might mean. So if you're looking at the impact site and it could go above or below, well, then you would choose above. So, okay, it's that higher quality. So we're going to have to offset find a better quality than we would if it was below the line. And then when you're making the decision on the offset site, and it could go above or below in terms of start quality, well, then you would choose below to compensate for that uncertainty, so that your decisions, there's always a margin of safety built into decisions or judgments where there's uncertainty. You're managing for uncertainty. And in my view, there should be sort of margins of safety or cautious judgment used in that way in any user inputs that are selected, you know, in the offset calculator. Just that concept of margins of safety to give you a greater confidence that you are making a precautionary decision.
Can I comment that certainly working for the Victorian Department, what we were constantly being told was that the various proponents and seekers of departmental information are asking for certainty, that they always want to be given a straight answer, no, you know, coming or going. It's very, very difficult to argue the precautionary principle and talk about uncertainty when you're being pressured at a bureaucratic level that you need to give a straight answer, that a yes or a no, because your proponents want certainty. And that's demand for certainty is clearly driving this calculator. And it's very, very hard to bring in a scientific precautionary principle. It doesn't go well, as I'm sure you would know very well.
It's very, very challenging, Vanessa. I'm with you. Absolutely. Well, I have just one more slide, and there we go. There's my notes again. There we go. There we go. I'm just going to put it all up there. Can you read that? Can you read it all? Or is it too small? I will stop sharing. I will share. That's better. but we don't need all this here. Well, so some thoughts that I've been having about how we manage all this nonsense, the reforms and what's gone before. I guess at a nutshell, I don't believe that the Parliament's going to disallow these national offset standards, because Labor and the right wingers, they have control in the Parliament. So the Conservatives will probably be delighted with what Labor's doing at the moment, because they didn't have to do it themselves. At the risk of sounding political, Adrian, apologies for doing that to your meeting. So I think the standards are going to just go through. If we're going to change the department's, it's all about changing the department's culture and the practice, and changing culture and practice is going to take time and sustained effort. So we are playing the long game. It's going to be a grind, but I think that there's scope to get better outcomes if the effort is coordinated across Victoria and also across the country, and that we make every submission count, and every submission on every referral that's going to have a significant impact or likely to have a significant impact, and every submission on a dodgy offset proposal has to be built on and bounce off the last. So we need to train the department so that their first contact with a new proponent or with a consultant is mindful of what they're likely to expect from the conservation movement, and manages that. You see, it's too late once the department gives advice to a proponent on what the process is going to be, and what the information requirements will be, or how they're going to interpret the policy. It's too late after all that work has been done, and we have issued the guidelines for the preparation of the assessment document, and the assessment document's been prepared. It's too late to turn it around and say, no, that's not right. They've already committed their time and money to preparing this documentation. We need to be onto the department so much that they are mindful of the right things or the better things to say when they first talk to a new proponent. Okay, so it's submit early and submit often. It has to be unrelenting, and it has to build over time. Now, you're doing this, Adrian, I'm sure, and I don't mean to tell anybody how to do their business, but
just making more work for me, Vaughan. That's what you're doing.
And I'm making work for myself too, Adrian.
Yes.
But this is what it's about. So I've put up some thoughts on the slide there. But Vanessa, I'll go to you.
Oh, okay. Look, I'm sorry. I keep banging on, and I do apologise, but this is something that gets my goat a bit. Look, just a query with the current reviews that is suggesting that federal powers will be delegated to the states. Is that correct? That that with the revision to the EPBC Act, that if the states say something is ticked off, then the feds say something is ticked off. Is that still the case? Would this affect this situation?
I think we are. I think we're facing that situation. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's one of them. And the second thing is in your first point, you say refuse to accept habitat quality scoring methods prepared by consultants. I can tell you on a stack of Bibles, the Victorian Government Department will not do anything like that. They do not have the resources. They do not have the expertise. So, yeah, we're over a barrel there. Sorry, Yvonne. I know you're still in there and kicking, but there's very few who still are.
No, Vanessa, I'm not. And basically they have cleaned us all out.
Oh, okay, sorry.
People there now don't know anything.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry to lose the confidence of everybody.
All right. So sorry, that reinforces my case.
I'm not asking anything here of of state agencies, or I mean, I'm talking
Yeah,
about
they're not.
I'm talking only here about the conservation movement. So,
Yeah.
so you know, we need to write to the minister expressing concerns about the offset assessment practice. Yeah? And just to simply say we refuse to accept habitat quality scoring methods that have been prepared by consultants. We want the department should do that as the regulator, and we expect to be consulted on something which has been drafted in collaboration with subject matter experts. And we just won't accept it otherwise. Otherwise, it's BS or it's just utterly conflicted.
Great.
And we should. And I'm starting to do this not so much in Victoria but New South Wales, monitoring and tracking EPBC referrals and assessments. And if there's a significant impact claimed in the referral, make a submission and tell them what we expect to see if it gets to the point of an offset being proposed. What is civil society's expectations of minimum assessment standards and minimum information requirements to be able to make an informed submission or judgment about the acceptability of the offset? So regulators are doing it on behalf of us, not on behalf of themselves or behalf of their client developers. They're acting on our behalf. And that sounds a bit naive and maybe a bit altruistic, Vanessa, but at the end of the day, you know, and if we're not happy with the assessment guidelines that are issued for the preparation of assessment documentation or offsets, then we escalate that concern. You know, this was the advice that we gave them at referral. At notice of referral is that based on our experience with previous dodgy offset proposals and assessments, this is what we expect to see. And if that doesn't come through, then we escalate. And then when the draft offset proposal comes out, we scrutinize that against the standards that we've set for what we think are acceptable information. And if we're not happy with that, then we push back and we escalate. And as we go, we record the systemic failure of taking on board reasonable requests at referral, reasonable submissions on assessment documentation, and document the failure and name and shame whomever's responsible. David.
Hi, Vaughan. Thanks for your chat. It's yeah, quite enlightening. I recently went through the Western Renewables Link inquiry process and attended hearings, and it was I felt completely out of my depth. You know, I'm going up against an ecology firm whose bread and butter is doing these offset calculations, and you know the offset proposal document just for the biodiversity chapter alone was the biodiversity section was 1,500 pages of overwhelming information about all kinds of different species and different ecosystem communities. And I was just feeling so out of my depth, but I just plugged away and did what I could. Did I make a difference? I don't know, but I feel like I held them to account as much as I could. But I think what I'm trying to get at is, as individuals, it's very, I think, limiting as to how much we can put in when we've got other jobs and so forth. But if you don't say anything, you get exactly what you put in, right? So you have to say something and just hope for the best that it makes an impact.
Yes. But you do. But I'm thinking that this needs to be better coordinated. So, and that we spread the load. So, for example, I'm proposing to monitor and track EPBC notices of referral, and that we have a template. We have a template, and that Adrian might sign the template, check to make sure that I haven't got, you know, introduced some errors, and that it's fit for purpose for that particular referral, and then it goes under Adrian's name. So there's a template, and we have as many templates as we can for different points in the process, and distribute the workload to people that have capacity at that time to do it. Perhaps naively, I would love to see a sort of an offsets black ops team in Victoria. If you had five or six or six people that were collaborating on offsets, kind of on the same page, sharing the load, picking up stuff as needed, but maintaining the pressure on the department at every point in the assessment and approval process, having a strategy for escalating when we're not satisfied, a strategy for naming and shaming and bringing the media in when we haven't been reasonably satisfied with the response. And over time, I think that will make a difference. We have to hope that that's going to make a difference, because I don't think we've got any option but to give that a red hot.
Vaughan, you have your hand up.
Yes. At the moment, like, I have been trying to put comments in on these new standards, but these new standards, there's no obligation to actually achieve the objectives or the outcomes of the standard or of the EPBC Act. They're turning it into a complete process, tick the box process, where you just need to follow the principles, and even then, that's if you feel like it. And so, you know, there's not even anything now to, you know, everything will just be thrown out saying, oh, but we don't have to do that, so we haven't done that. Or, you know, there's no obligation to actually achieve a good outcome or meet the objectives. It's just, you know, if you follow this stupid process, which is what I find with the native veg regulations in Victoria, you do the tick box. They don't care if you get a good outcome or not. It's just following a process. And this is how they're turning the EPBC Act, you know, with all these stupid standards. It's just crap.
Well, I think you've summarised it pretty well, Yvonne. Yes. Agreed. But I think that if we can just be, there must be scope for a more efficient, more strategic, more coordinated approach. See, I am also trying to engage people in other jurisdictions to find like-minded people in Queensland and New South Wales. I have it pretty well sorted here in the ACT because I have good networks here. And if there are people around the country from every jurisdiction, from the regions, saying more or less the same thing, then I think we're in a better place for when the reforms come around again and there's the need to change again, because things don't stay the same forever. You know, we might have to put up with this for 10 years, but we'll, in another 10 to 15 years, we're set the scene now for better outcomes in 10 to 15 years, which admittedly doesn't sound very appealing, Yvonne, but what option do we have? I do think that the Albanese government is setting this up for basically, what was it, one-stop shop 2.0. You might remember when the Mad Monk got into power back in 2013 and went straight into the one-stop shop program, where they were going to devolve EPBC Act decision making to all the states and territories, and it failed because some states pushed back and the Senate had some power or capacity over it. I think we're back there, and I suspect that the national standards are set so low that no jurisdiction is going to trip getting over them. So yeah, but plans like this might fail. We cannot be confident that Albanese government will set up a one-stop shop everywhere and be able to maintain that. So things don't stay the same, and I think we need to be hopeful that there will be change, and we need to be there with all the materials, making a case for better outcomes when we get there. I mean, who knows? We might get this sooner rather than later if we maintain the anger and we're coordinated.
But it strikes me too, Vaughan, that one of the main messages is that even if the policy doesn't change, we can influence the people who interpret the policy and administer the policy, and that will get us
Yes.
some good gains down the track. And that's nice to see that sort of optimism about what to me is a very black box thing. The DQ, we don't have I don't have any understanding of how things actually work within the department. So it's good to hear this sort of well, hopefulness, I suppose, in a way, or well, that might be an exaggeration, but some level of optimism about the potential for change.
There are many good people. There are many good people in the department, Adrian, that are doing the best they can under rather trying circumstances. And there would be a lot of people, even in the middle management, who will see value in the work that we might be doing, because they can then present that to the more senior people at the minister's office and say, look, there is a case here for administering what we have better. Because look, I'm reasonably confident that the EPBC Act as it stood and the offset policy as they stood could probably have delivered us quite reasonable outcomes. It just wasn't administered with a view to that. So you know, you can have the strongest policies and legislation you like, but if you have weak decision makers, if you have regulators that are missing in action, which is the case here, then you get bad outcomes.
David, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Adrian. Just a question relating to the EPBC reform acts that are coming, the new streamlined assessment pathway that's going to come in. Just wondering how that will relate with to the offsets policy.
Is that a question to me?
Yes, Vaughan.
Okay. Look, it's not clear in my mind, but the best I understand it is that there may be some assessment pathways there where there isn't an opportunity to comment on the assessment documentation. And for mine, that means that we need to go hard on the referrals, making clear in terms of submission on notice of referral what our expectations are, because the next opportunity to comment might be on the recommendation report. But I am very happy to be corrected on that, because I've seen some conflicting information. Okay, but David, when we all know more clearly what it is, then we need to adjust our strategy to account for it. Whatever what will be, will be. We just need to adjust our strategy to account for it.
Thank you.
Vanessa.
Apologies again for banging on. Vaughan, are you familiar with the Common Assessment Method Working Group, which is the national working group that's been identifying standard criteria for assessing threatened species and communities at a nationwide level? Because although the various jurisdictions legislation is a bit all over the place in terms of consistency, that's one area where there has been a meeting of minds in terms of how you actually identify what species and communities are threatened, and sort of the key conservation steps to take up with them. I'm just even wondering, because I used to be on that committee, I'm not now, of course, whether or not if you'd known anything about it, whether that could be an avenue for a bit of consultation on a bit more consistency across the assessment steps, but also to these offset issues. So okay. I'm just flagging that as a thinking point.
Yep. Look, and I think possibly along those lines is that has crossed my mind that we should write to the Threatened Species Scientific Committee, the EPBC TSSC, and exactly. and it had and it's sort of at 2:00 in the morning reflections is, wouldn't it be nice to write a letter to the TSSC and explain to them how their conservation advices are being abused by consultants to amplify, to game the habitat quality scoring method, and ultimately the offset calculations. Because they should have a view. The TSSC should have an informed and influential view on the adequacy of quite a few of these things we're talking about.
Well, but they don't have any sort of real power, as it were, whereas the Common Assessment Method Memorandum of Understanding has been signed up to by all the Australian states. And that's all about the conservation identification approaches, if not necessarily the management. So I'm wondering if that's something to tap into.
Well, so yes, maybe it is. I don't know the structure and function of that committee well enough to comment on it, but I think it's all avenues. Any avenue that is an opportunity to highlight these fundamental concerns, to highlight these perversions, is worth trying. It can do no harm.
Indeed. Perhaps we're getting close to well over time, as it were, but it's perhaps we should just finish with a comment from Peter D. Unless, Peter, you want to say it yourself, otherwise I can read it out. Sounds like there is scope to track the Yeah, Peter?
Oh, look, yeah, it was more just that I think all this is really valuable in trying to work as much as we can within the system, but the big risk is kind of getting lost in the detail, and certainly the detail in terms of kind of political leaders and the broader community will lose them. And so I'm not by all means we need to do all this, but in terms of kind of the priority of what we do and how we use our energy, maybe it's better to recognise we've got an election in 2 years federally. Let's kind of potentially just really focus on the big picture, just getting a new paradigm in how we deal with this, and present and work up an alternative, because what we've got now is just rubbish.
Certainly the pushing for the election is going to be an important thing, definitely. I wonder too, like with the just if there's anything, just even like in spot checking people's calculations and so on, like naming, and like if there was some sort of auditing of these submissions and so on, and the processes, like if things were just picked at randomly every now and then, rather than changing the whole system, just actually getting it some responsibility for what you commit to paper, would be useful. Vaughan, do you have any comments on that, or you just?
Oh, me.
No, not always you. Yes.
Well, sorry for not responding to that. I think you need to operate at both levels. You need to operate at the strategic and at the project level, because it concerns me to see a lot of time and energy being put into responding reactively to reform, and all this colour and movement that is taking up so much people's time and effort, and yet there's the day-to-day bad decisions that are being made without accountability. Mm-hmm. So it's possible for bad decisions, poorly evidenced decisions to continue to be made, whilst everyone's responding to reform proposals. And there's the risk of losing opportunities in the here and now for the potential of simply being ignored, simply having your comments ignored during the reform process.
Yeah. Yes, ouch. Okay, but yes, I can see that. David,
just quickly, I think that both Peter and Vaughan's positions are equally valid, and that they're not mutually exclusive. That working on the detail and getting the case study evidence together can then be condensed and simplified, and you've got a very strong evidentiary basis on which to campaign on. And anybody who wants to go deeper can. And I think that you then have a very well-informed election campaign that may or may not save some iconic species and sites along the way.
Great. Indeed. David Unwin.
Yeah, just on some of the thoughts that were being brainstormed around, it just made me reflect on what's happening with the councils, the local councils in Victoria. There's a group called Council Watch, and they scrutinise all the bad decisions that get made by council, and they publish them online. They make it known and they put it out there. And it's a bit cringy to see your own council get thrown up in spotlights, but hey, I now know what's happening, and it's then for me to be able to make a decision on that if I accept that or not. But had it not been for Council Watch, I might not have known. And so that's that name and shame that you're talking about, and make it available online for people to know what's going on.
At the risk of trying to summarise a very broad and complex conversation, we need to do something moving forward, and we need to agree to meet again or to coordinate and so on. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I think that would be something we should definitely yes, try and take all of this forward. Is there anything like super pressing? Any last comments that people want to make? All right. Well, perhaps we can just give Vaughan a very big round of applause and and a yawn from Vanessa just as she unmutes her microphone. Perfect timing. Thank you, Vaughan. It's been super stimulating. And I'm sure a lot will come from this, if not tomorrow, then within a 15-year time frame.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks everybody. Good to meet you. I hope we can conspire together. Okay.
I think that sounds like a good idea. We all need to conspire. We'll set up a conspiring committee and proceed.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.